There are moments in life, lasting no more than a single breath, yet powerful enough to change the direction of an entire destiny. That night, under the skin-cutting cold rain of a small American town, a poor waiter wiped down the last table of his late-night shift. The woman who had just left wore a flawless black suit, carrying the composure of someone who had never once looked at prices on a menu. She left behind a $0 tip. No apology, no backward glance, only an empty plate and a neatly folded piece of paper hidden beneath it. The waiter bent down to pick it up, and in that very moment, he had no idea yet that what lay in his hand was not just a piece of paper, but a doorway leading to a completely different life. His name was Daniel, 36 years old, a single father, and a night shift waiter at a diner on the very edge of town, a place people only stopped at when they were too tired to keep going. Once, Daniel had sat in a brightly lit office typing lines of code for a transportation company in the city. The pay wasn't high, but it was steady. Back then, life had plans, had insurance, had a tomorrow. Until one Tuesday afternoon when a brief phone call erased all of those plans. His wife, Megan, didn't survive a traffic accident. Their daughter, Sophie, was only 3 years old at the time, too young to understand why her mother would never come home again. Daniel left his office job, not because he was weak, but because there are choices in life that cannot be measured by money. He chose the night shift, so that he could take his daughter to school during the day, so he could tie her shoelaces himself every morning, so that in the evenings, before heading to work, he still had time to read her a short story and kiss her forehead as the bedroom light went out. The diner wasn't wealthy, neither were the regulars. Some nights, the tips were enough to cover the gas. On other nights, there wasn't even enough for breakfast. But Daniel always smiled, not because he wasn't tired, but because he had learned something very early on. Kindness doesn't cost money, but it helps people stay standing. He remembered every customer's name, remembered who liked their coffee weak, remembered who needed a few extra minutes to wake up before driving on. No one remembered his name, but he remembered them. And Daniel had no idea that in that dim corner of the diner, there was a quiet gaze taking note of everything he did. The diner, open late at night, wasn't loud. It was tired. Tired in the way people are when they've spent nearly all their strength on a long day. At the counter, Joe, a long-haul truck driver, was retelling the same old story about the time his rig got stranded in a snowstorm years ago. Daniel listened, nodded at the right moments, then gently slid the glass of liquor farther away. "Another drink would be dangerous, Joe." His voice held no judgment, only concern. Joe chuckled softly, then complied. At table number 3, a young college student sat hunched over a stack of textbooks. Her coffee had gone cold long ago, yet she stayed, stretching out each minute as if every second inside this diner was cheaper than the world outside. Daniel had seen her many times before, seen her silently count coins. I saw her cheeks flush when the money wasn't enough. Tonight was no different. When he brought the check, Daniel crossed out the number at the bottom. He rewrote it in simple handwriting. 0.00. "I can't." She looked up, her voice trembling. "You can," Daniel said quietly. "Just when you're able someday, do something kind for someone else." The girl froze, her eyes filled with tears. Daniel turned away before she could say thank you. Not because he didn't need the words, but because he knew. Some good deeds lose their value the moment they wait to be acknowledged. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Daniel stepped into the kitchen. "Sophie?" "Daddy, I miss you." Her voice was small and heavy with sleep. Daniel leaned against the cracked brick wall, feeling his chest tighten. "I'll be home a little late tonight, okay?" "I know. I just wanted to say goodnight." The call ended. Daniel stood still for a few more seconds, staring down at the worn tile floor beneath his feet. 5 years. 5 years of missing bedtime. 5 years of telling himself he was doing the right thing. When he stepped back out of the kitchen, the fluorescent lights cast a glow over a corner of the diner he hadn't noticed before. The woman in the black suit was still sitting there. No phone, no book, no hurry, just silent observation. Daniel didn't know that every small action of his, every gentle word, every time he chose kindness over convenience, was being remembered. And very soon, the price of that kindness would no longer be a single exhausting night of work, but a choice wide enough to change his entire life. Daniel walked toward the corner table with a coffee pot in his hand. The woman looked up. Her gaze was sharp and still, not curious in the usual sense, but more like an evaluation. "Would you like your coffee reheated?" Daniel asked, his tone polite as always. "No." Her voice was low, clear, and carefully controlled. Then she lowered her eyes back to the cup in front of her as if the conversation was already over. Daniel stepped back. A strange feeling crept into his chest. Not fear, just unease. She didn't belong here. The black suit fit perfectly, down to every seam. The watch caught the fluorescent light. The leather bag resting on the chair beside her, the kind of leather that, at a glance you could tell, was worth more than his monthly rent. And yet she stayed. For more than an hour. No hurry, no boredom, just watching. 10:30. She stood up and walked straight to the register. "Coffee and apple pie?" Daniel asked. "Yes." The total came to $8.50. She placed her credit card on the counter without a word. Daniel ran the card and handed her the receipt to sign. She signed quickly, neatly, set the receipt down. Then she turned and walked out, the glass door closing behind her, the rain outside still falling steadily, just as before. Daniel looked down. The tip line? Blank. A silent 0. He wasn't surprised. The wealthy rarely tipped much. They often thought the meal itself was enough. Daniel folded the receipt and walked back toward the table to clean it, and that was when he saw it. A white envelope, carefully placed beneath the edge of the plate. Not obvious, not rushed, as if someone had intended for him to notice it only after everything was finished. Daniel picked it up. On the outside, in neat handwriting, there was just a single line, "For the waiter who still remembers customers' names." His heart sank slightly. He didn't know why. Inside was a sheet of paper and a business card. "I need to meet you. This is not charity. This is an offer. 9:30 tomorrow morning, North Star Holdings. Ask for Eleanor Wright. Do not ignore this." Daniel froze. Eleanor Wright. The name that appeared constantly on television, in financial articles, on lists of the most powerful women in America. A female billionaire. A CEO. Just moments ago, she had been sitting in his poor diner for over an hour, watching him, leaving no tip, and inviting him to meet her. Daniel folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, as if storing away something too large to grasp just yet fully. He continued his shift, but everything was different now. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside him, a door had just quietly opened, leading to a place he had never believed he belonged to. The shift ended around 2 a.m. Daniel drove his old car back to the small apartment at the end of a row of low buildings, where the hallway lights were so dim he had to guess each step of the staircase. The apartment was dark, except for the faint glow of a nightlight in Sophie's room. He opened the door as quietly as possible. She was sleeping on her side, hugging a worn, old stuffed animal, her hair slightly tousled against the pillow. Daniel stood there for a long time, doing nothing, just watching her breathe. There are moments when a person finally understands this. All the effort in a lifetime is ultimately just to protect one peaceful sleep. His phone vibrated. A new email. Important notice regarding next semester's tuition. Daniel opened it, read it once, then reread it. Tuition had nearly doubled. A new academic program, facility upgrades, polite, cold lines of text. He opened his banking app. Balance $412. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall in front of him. Bare white, no pictures, no hope. Changing Sophie's school was not an option. That school was where she had friends, where the teachers understood her situation, the rare bit of stability left behind after the day her mother never came home. Daniel closed his eyes. There was no miracle. No path suddenly reveals itself. At that moment, the piece of paper in his pocket felt heavy as stone. He took it out, opened it again. This is not charity. This is an offer. An offer for what? And in return for what? Daniel let out a faint, bitter smile. The wealthy don't give things away. They invest. And every investment demands a return. He thought about throwing the letter away, forgetting it, continuing life as it was, but then he thought of Sophie, of the shoes she had outgrown. He kept saying she could wear for a few more months, of the science books she had stared at for a long time, then quietly placed back on the shelf. If there were even a 1% chance to prevent his child from learning to give up too easily, did he have the right not to try? Daniel lay down on the bed, but he didn't sleep. The ceiling blurred faintly in the darkness. He thought of Megan. The night before the accident, she had said, "Give our daughter a life I never had." He had tried for 5 long years. But sometimes, trying is not the same as being enough. Early the next morning, Sophie crawled into his bed, her hair a mess, pressing her face against his chest. "Did you sleep well, Daddy?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. I dreamed about Mommy. She said she's proud of the two of us." The little girl hugged him tightly. Daniel stared up at the ceiling and made his decision. He would go to North Star Holdings, not because he believed in miracles, not because he believed the rich would save him, but because refusing to try was the same as giving up, and he had promised himself he would never give up for his child. The North Star Holdings building rose in the heart of the city like a massive block of glass, reflecting the sky above, and the feeling of smallness in those standing below. Daniel stood across the street for nearly 10 minutes, not because he was lost, but because he needed a few more breaths before stepping into a world that had never been meant for him. The old suit from his wedding 8 years earlier was tight at the shoulders, short at the ankles, but it was the most formal thing he owned. The lobby was vast, cold, and bright. The scent of expensive perfume. Marble floors reflect every misplaced step. "Who are you here to see?" The receptionist's voice was professional, polite, and distant. "Eleanor Wright," Daniel said slowly. "She has an appointment with me?" A slight lift of the head, a brief phone call, then her expression changed. "Elevator on the left, 38th floor." Daniel entered the elevator alone. The numbers climbed steadily upward. In the polished mirror, he looked like someone who had stepped into the wrong life. The doors opened. A long, quiet corridor, glass and dark wood. A young assistant, dressed in an expensive suit, greeted him. Mr. Brooks, this way, please. They passed offices flooded with light, people typing on computers worth more than his car. At the end of the corridor stood a large door. Inside, Eleanor Wright stood behind a desk so wide it could have fit the kitchen of his apartment. She wasn't sitting, just standing there, spine straight, her gaze sharp, just like the first time they met. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't certain you would." Daniel sat down, hands resting on his knees. "With all due respect," he said, "I want to know why I'm here, and why—" The tip was zero. Eleanor poured coffee, poured it herself, unhurried, unavoidant. "That was a test." The air froze. "A test?" Daniel shot to his feet. "You tested me like an experiment?" "Yes." She looked directly at him. "I needed to know how you would react when you were treated with disregard." The words struck his chest like fire. "I didn't come here to be humiliated," Daniel said, his voice dropping. "I thought you needed help. But it turns out I was just entertainment." He turned to leave. "This is not a game," Eleanor said, her tone calm to the point of cold. "Sit down, Daniel." He didn't turn back. "You passed the test," she continued. "You didn't curse. You didn't complain. You didn't humiliate me behind my back. You simply said, 'Thank you,' and wished me a good night." Daniel stopped short. "Because I need someone who treats others with kindness, even when they are not being paid." A long silence followed. Daniel turned back, facing her. "You watched me, just to see if I was kind enough?" "I watched you," Eleanor said slowly, "because I've been searching for someone like you for months." She stepped out from behind the desk, standing closer. "You are kind when no one is watching. That is the rarest thing of all." Daniel remained standing, but the anger had faded, replaced by confusion. "And now?" he asked. Eleanor opened a folder. "Now," she said, "I make you an offer." Eleanor opened the folder in front of Daniel. Inside were neatly arranged pages, bold headings, numbers aligned with a cold precision. "I want you to work for me," she said. "Not at the diner. Here." Daniel didn't respond. He only looked. "The title is Director of Community Outreach for a New Project. $78,000 a year, full benefits, office hours." She paused for a beat, then continued, as if she knew exactly which strike would land next. "And a full scholarship for your daughter at one of the best private schools in the state." The air in the room suddenly grew heavy. Daniel felt the number slam into his chest like a physical impact. 78,000. He was making less than 25,000 after working 60 hours a week. That amount wasn't just money. It was utility bills that would no longer be overdue, brakes that would no longer screech, and dinners where father and daughter could sit together. Daniel closed the folder. "What do you want from me?" His voice was softer than he expected. "I'm just a waiter," he continued. "I don't have a degree in this field, no connections, no management experience." Eleanor sat down, placing both hands on the desk. "That is precisely why," she said. "You know what it's like to work 2 jobs and still come up short. You know what it's like to smile at people who don't see you. You know what it's like to make choices no one should ever have to make." She slid the folder back toward him. "I don't need someone doing charity to feel good about themselves. I need someone who understands." Daniel opened the folder again. The project name was printed in bold on the first page. Second Chance Pathway, a program for single parents, low-income workers, children without the privilege of choice. Job training, childcare support, employment connections, educational scholarships. The budget? Millions of dollars. You want me to run this? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. I want you to help build it, Eleanor said, so that it's not just beautiful on reports. Daniel shook his head slowly. This is too big. Eleanor nodded. Yes, and that is the price. She looked directly at him. If you thought this would be easy, then you wouldn't be the person I'm looking for. Daniel stood up, feeling his legs grow unsteady. Give me time, he said. I need to think. 3 days, Eleanor replied. No more. He walked out of the glass-walled office, down the long, silent corridor. In the elevator descending, his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. This was no longer the question of, do I have enough money? It was, do I have the courage to carry something this heavy? The news spread faster than Daniel had expected. Just 1 day after the meeting in the glass tower, a local news site published an article. Billionaire Eleanor Wright hires poor waiter for high-paying position. What's really happening behind the scenes? No accusations, no evidence, just questions placed carefully, and gaps wide enough for people to fill with their own assumptions. By that afternoon, everyone at the diner knew. Marcus, the old cook, no longer joked with him. Jenny looked at him with pity. Even the owner pulled Daniel aside. I trust you, he said quietly, but this world isn't kind to people who rise too fast. Daniel nodded. He understood. But the real blow came that evening. His phone rang while he was wiping tables. Sophie's teacher. Some parents were talking in front of the children. Her voice hesitated. Sophie was teased today. Daniel went still. That night, Sophie came home with red, swollen eyes. Did you do something wrong, Daddy? She asked. The kids say you're taking advantage of rich people. Daniel pulled her into his arms. Anger, shame, and helplessness twisted tight in his chest. No, sweetheart, he whispered. Daddy didn't do anything wrong. Then why are they saying that? Daniel had no answer simple enough for a 7-year-old. That night he called Eleanor. His voice was tight. I can't do this, he said. My daughter is paying the price. Daniel, listen to me. No, he cut in. Money isn't worth her being hurt. He hung up. Sitting alone in the dark living room, Daniel realized a bitter truth. Rising in this world sometimes hurts more than standing still. And if he had to choose, he would always choose peace for his daughter. The next morning, while Daniel was standing in the kitchen making coffee, there was a knock at the door. Not hurried, not forceful, just 2 knocks, enough to demand attention. Daniel opened the door. Eleanor Wright stood there. No bodyguards, no assistant, no glass lobby, no private elevator, just a woman in a long gray coat, heels that didn't quite belong in the worn hallway of the apartment complex. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, she said, but I thought some things shouldn't be said over the phone. Daniel stepped aside, letting her enter the small apartment. Eleanor looked around. An old sofa, a small dining table was pushed against the wall. Toys were scattered across the floor. No pity, no judgment, just silence. Sophie was sitting at the table eating cereal, still in her pajamas. She looked up when she saw the stranger. Daddy, who is that? She asked. Daniel hesitated. He didn't know how to introduce her. This is Miss Eleanor. Eleanor crouched down, bringing herself to Sophie's eye level. Hello, she said gently. I brought something for you. From her handbag, she took out a book. The science book that Sophie had stared at for a long time in the store, then quietly placed back on the shelf. Sophie's eyes widened. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Your father told me," Eleanor smiled. "And because I think you're someone who shouldn't have to learn how to give up too early." Sophie looked at Daniel. He nodded. She accepted the book with both hands, hugging it tightly as if afraid it might disappear. "Thank you," she said softly. Eleanor turned to Daniel. "What the press wrote," she said slowly. "I'll handle it. They'll issue corrections." Daniel remained silent. "But I didn't come here," she continued, "to persuade you with power." She looked back at Sophie. "Your father turned down a great deal of money to protect you. That's something not many adults are capable of." Sophie pressed her lips together. "But the kids at school say my dad is bad." Eleanor placed her hand on the table, her voice lowering. "They don't understand," she said. "When I was young, my mother was just like your father. People looked down on her too. But I was always proud of my mother." She looked directly at Sophie. "And you should be proud of your father as well." Tears fell onto the pages of the book. Daniel turned away, not wanting anyone to see that his own eyes were wet. Eleanor stood up. "If you decide to walk away," she said, "I respect that." She paused at the door. "But remember this. You wouldn't be doing this for money. You'd be doing it for children like Sophie. Children who learn to hold back far too early." She opened the door. 3 days, Eleanor said quietly. "You still have one left." The door closed. Sophie climbed onto the sofa, sitting close to Daniel, still holding the book. "Daddy," she said softly. "She seems nice." Daniel was silent for a few seconds. "Yes," he replied. "I think so too." Sophie looked up at him. "So, if you could help a lot of kids like me, should you do it?" That question. It wasn't big, it wasn't lofty, but it struck directly at the place Daniel had been avoiding for a very long time. The apartment fell silent after the door closed. Only the soft clink of a spoon against a cereal bowl remained, and the steady breathing of the morning. Sophie sat in Daniel's lap, opening the science book and turning each page filled with bright, colorful illustrations, planets, animals, things she had once only dared to look at before turning away. "Daddy," Sophie said without looking up, "if you can help kids like me, why wouldn't you help?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the empty wall in front of him, the place where a wedding photo of him and Megan once hung, where now there was only a small nail and a quiet emptiness. He had too many reasons to say no. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. But all of those reasons came from an adult's ego. Sophie's question came from somewhere else. Simple truth. Daniel held her closer. "You know," he said slowly, "sometimes adults are afraid to try because if they fail, they think they'll disappoint others." Sophie looked up at him, studying his face for a long moment. "But if you don't try," she said, "then those kids will feel sad, like I did when I couldn't buy the book." That sentence. It wasn't accusing. It wasn't loud, but it brought down every wall Daniel had built over the past 5 years. He closed his eyes. In that moment, he no longer thought about the press. He no longer gave a thought to public opinion. He no longer thought about how he looked in other people's eyes. He thought only of children who had learned not to ask for things far too early. "You're right," Daniel whispered. "I should try." Sophie smiled, A relieved smile, as if she had just set down a burden no one realized she had been carrying. That morning, Daniel called Eleanor. She answered almost immediately. "I accept," he said, "but I have conditions." "I'm listening." 6 months probation. I won't accept the scholarship for my daughter until I prove I deserve it. I'll keep 1 shift a week at the diner, and I won't be a figurehead. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice calm, but with something warmer beneath it. "Agreed. You're tougher than I expected." Daniel smiled faintly. "I learned that from watching my wife work 2 shifts a day." "When can you start?" 2 weeks from now. I need to give notice to my boss." 2 weeks, Eleanor replied. "Welcome aboard, Daniel." The call ended. Daniel looked down at Sophie. "I'm going to do it," he said. "Not to become rich." Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck. "I know," she whispered. "You're doing it for people." Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt like he was just trying to survive. He was stepping into something else, something bigger, something worth being afraid of. On his first day walking into North Star Holdings, Daniel realized one thing immediately. Kindness didn't earn him a welcome. Side glances, whispers just loud enough to be heard. The waiter the CEO pulled up. An emotional project. He won't last long. Daniel didn't argue. He was used to being underestimated. The offices on the 38th floor were bright, but Daniel felt like he was standing at the edge of a world that hadn't yet decided whether to let him in. He arrived early, left late. He read through files of struggling families until his eyes ached. He called nonprofit organizations one by one, sat for hours with workers who were painfully familiar with rejection. Daniel didn't talk much about vision. He asked straightforward questions. What do you need so you don't have to quit your job? How old is your child? Who watches them at night? These weren't the questions of an executive. They were the questions of someone who had once stood in that exact place. The Second Chance Pathway program didn't begin with a grand launch. It began with a woman named Rachel, a single mother of 2 working night shifts at a supermarket, earning just enough to pay rent. Daniel helped her enroll in a medical billing course, connected her with a local hospital, covered childcare costs. 3 months later, Rachel's income doubled. She came back to Daniel's office, bringing no flowers, no gifts, only a look of relief. He had never seen anyone like that before. The second person Daniel helped was Marcus. Marcus stood outside the glass office, hat in his hands, awkward, just as Daniel had been on his first day here. "I was wrong about you," Marcus said. "I'm sorry." Daniel smiled. "It's okay. Everyone is afraid when they see someone else move ahead." 2 weeks later, Marcus began training as a head chef. 6 months later, he would be earning twice his old salary. 1 person at a time. No noise, no press. But by the 4th month, the program had helped more than 50 families. And it was right then that everything nearly fell apart. Everything began on a Monday morning. Eleanor collapsed in her office from sheer exhaustion. 90 hours of work a week. Too many projects, too many burdens. She was rushed to the hospital for observation. And just a few hours later, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. Daniel was not invited, but he knew exactly what was happening. The Second Chance Pathway project was being labeled as costly, risky, lacking clear returns. When Daniel stepped into the boardroom, 12 men in expensive suits looked up at him in unison. "This is a closed meeting," one of them said, his voice cold as steel. "I know," Daniel replied, "but I still need to speak." He didn't sit down. "You're looking at numbers," he said slowly, but you're not seeing the people behind them. They pushed back, charts, expenses, ROI. Daniel listened. Then he told a story about Eleanor's mother, who works as a waitress and has 2 shifts a day. About a poor construction worker who once stood up to help her when no one else would. About Rachel, the mother who was now returning to help others. About Marcus, the former cook who was now training the next generation. You're not investing in a program, Daniel said. You're investing in dignity. The room fell silent. If you cut this project, he continued, you're not just cutting a budget. You're cutting hope. He placed his hand on the table. And I won't stay if that happens. Daniel turned and walked out. 2 hours later, Eleanor called from the hospital. How did they vote? She asked. Unanimous, Daniel replied. The project continues. Eleanor let out a soft laugh, tired but real. I chose the right person. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the small apartment holding a letter from Sophie's school. A full scholarship. 4 years. He folded the letter. I won't accept it, he told his daughter. Sophie's eyes widened. Why not? Because I want you to stay here, with your friends, with people like you. Sophie thought for a moment, then smiled. So, are we rich now, Daddy? Daniel smiled, pulling her into his arms. No, sweetheart. But we have enough. Friday night. Daniel still worked 1 shift a week at the old diner. Joe still told his stories. Jenny was still saving for school. The familiar faces, and some new ones, too. A young man walked in, paint on his shirt, the tired eyes of someone working 3 jobs a day. He ordered the cheapest coffee. When it came time to pay, Daniel crossed out the final number on the bill. Someone's already paid for you, he said. Just remember, do the same for someone else when you can. The young man was speechless. In the corner of the diner, Eleanor was sitting there. She left $100 and a small note. You're doing very well. Don't stop. Daniel put the money into the shared tip jar, but he kept the note. Outside, the rain had stopped. He drove his old car home, to where his daughter was sleeping, and tomorrow was waiting. Some tips can't be measured in money. There are small actions that travel farther than we expect, and there are stories that doesn't end here. If you believe kindness doesn't need to be loud, if you believe an ordinary person can create change, like this video so the story can continue. Share it, because somewhere out there, someone may need to see it. And don't forget to subscribe to Deep Life Tales, where we tell slow stories, so you have time to feel them. Kindness won't make you rich, but it will make you whole.